I'm just going to open up to discussion from the audience. I'm going to call on a few people, take a couple questions, and we can sort of answer them in that way. And I'm going to practice a progressive stack. So I'm going to make sure sort of oppressed nationalities, oppressed genders get to speak first, and people who haven't spoken up yet also. So if people have questions, raise their hand and I'll take a stack. We'll also take questions from the live stream as well. So I have to make sure. Will you tell me if there's questions that pop up?
No, I meant if somebody doesn't want to be live streamed.
Oh, right. If you don't want to be on camera, say so. Yeah. Any questions, comments? Sean? Anything yet?
I have a question, I just don't know how to form it yet, so give me some
Okay,
time.
sure, yeah. We'll start with Sean and then we'll see where we go from there. Go ahead.
Okay, so one of the big trends maybe in like the past 10 or 20 years is like kind of changes to the way the US looks at immigration policy, which is still really important for kind of the diaspora, where there's sort of an emphasis on this kind of prioritizing the social value of immigrants. I use air quotes for value, but to kind of make a priority for highly educated or those that have a lot of value to kind of the current sort of capitalist system, rather than 100 years ago someone that was more working class. So that maybe as we kind of continue along those lines, the way the diaspora looks during different waves of immigration might start to look more kind of toward people that feel beholden to capitalism. So how do we kind of adjust the way we do outreach and the way that we build solidarity to kind of account for people that may not necessarily benefit from capitalism but feel like they have some incentive to?
Yeah. We'll try to, if there's any other questions, we can answer it now, but I want to make sure. There's no other questions. Okay. You want to give it a shot?
Such an easy question to resolve and understand.
Yeah, it's a little kind of low-hanging fruit there, Sean. I can start. I'll just speak to how sort of mainstream forces in the U.S. talk about immigration and immigration policy, because I think you have it on the head where it's like the value that we assigned to migrants and immigrants, where it's not based on, and what you hear out of mainstream politicians is not based on solidarity with them. It's not based on the reasons that upheavals take place in countries that people want to migrate from, aka war and imperialism. It's about sort of, and you hear liberals say it all the time. They say, oh, well, if we can't have immigrants, then who's going to do all our cheap labor, right? Who's going to work for way less than we're willing to pay for, right? I think that's at the basis of your question. I don't think I have very good answers for the rest of it, so I just wanted to talk about that.
Well, I think that, okay, so two things. I think that it is important to, to target people from all classes here to support the revolution. And I cannot claim to be part of the working class at all, like in my past and in my present. I'm like solidly Petty B Foundation. But like when I look at how the movement kind of plays itself out in the Philippines, you have people who come from landlord classes, people who come from petty bourgeois classes. We bring them here along with the leaders from working class and peasant communities, and they are talking about poor people's issues and drum beating the issue of like the oppressed classes in the Philippines in the same way that you have your leaders from the oppressed classes doing. So there has to be different ways to reach people. And I think, like, just to compare our experiences, I mean, I had the luxury of coming to my realizations in a more individual and intellectualized way, but my transformation happened when, you know, I got organized and started to be part of a movement. And at the same time, I think although, you know, publicly there's a lot of it seems like the U.S. is really striving to get these educated immigrants. There are still like a lot of programs or backdoor ways for American businesses to get cheap labor, like through the J1 program, and they do everything they can to keep those doors open. And there's also the whole army of undocumented people in this country who these businesses rely upon. So while we reach the, you know, the more privileged sector of immigrants, like, it's important to, I guess, make our main outreach be to really, like, what Lone was saying, to the working class among the immigrants and in our community.
Yeah. I think I definitely agree. I think that we have to figure out ways to reach different, you know, sectors of our communities, and thinking about how it is possible for folks to support revolutions and be revolutionaries regardless of the class background that they have come from. On a very concrete, on a very like concrete and I think technical point, for me, I think it's helpful to explore how I really appreciated the framing that you put, right, that people who may not actually benefit from it but feel an incentive or drawn to it, how does that play out, not just in a economic way or in a labor perspective, I think, as in, you know, referencing some of what Andrew talked about earlier, but how does it play out in terms of issues of racism, of patriarchy, of homophobia and transphobia, and I think that opens up some of the opportunities to figure out how we might be talking about these things. And then translating that into our organizing tactics and our organizing frame, right? Whether or not, you know, someone considers themselves as a part of or are a part of a socialist organization, for example, they are a part of some sort of organization or institution that needs to be organized, whether it be their workplace or their school or community center, or the housing neighborhood or development that they live in. I think very concretely starting from where people are is really crucial and has a lot of benefits. I just lost my thought. But I'm just going to go back to this piece around, like, I think really examining, like, what are all of the tentacles of capitalism, that if the entry point, it can be difficult sometimes from a class-based perspective, and purely from a labor economic perspective, that might be difficult. I think digging a little bit to think about how, you know, I'm like thinking about you know, my mother, for example, again, who you know, when we talk about the ways that capitalism impacts us, it's not just about our like wages or our employment. It's how we think about other communities that are also being impacted by capitalism. So how do we have conversations about that too, right? That if people can't have a conversation about it from a standpoint of like what they're being paid or what their job is or what their labor is, that they can also be thinking about it in terms of like, where do I live versus where do other people live? Or what are the schools that I attend in comparison to the schools that other people attend? Yeah.
Thanks. Any other questions? I'm watching the live stream very carefully, and nobody's asked questions yet. Hannah?
This one is kind of similar, but it's more under how large this umbrella of Asian American is, and how it might be difficult sometimes to form I'm not saying that it's ever an excuse to not form solidarity between different groups, but when like the branch of Asian American is so large, and when Asian Americans come from so many different like nationalities, ethnicities, and races that have their own kind of like history of like struggle and oppression, and like capitalistic oppression especially, how does that look within like the context of like a more unified, I guess, approach to Marxism? And it's kind of similar. So I still haven't really formed out the question yet.
Oh, wow. That's a great question.
I really have a hard time with the phrase Asian American. Like, I was talking to Katrina and Andrew about this for similar reasons, right? Like, it's sort of, we come from a lot of different experiences, patterns of migration, languages, who got colonized by who was occupied by who, which is where I think for me personally, forming a Marxist perspective on that oppression was really important, because I think what is unifying again comes back to this question of like class, and understanding, and of course understanding class to also mean like, you know, issues of like racism and patriarchy and all of that, right? Class in that sense of the word is important, yeah, that's where I like to go back to, because it helps to really, I think it helps me to really understand also some of the contradictions too, right? Why is that there are, you know, there are, in Vietnam, right, like there are like petty bourgeois classes, or there's a class of petty bourgeois Vietnamese people, right? They're not just like petty bourgeois white people, right? Like, but that, and I think in order, holding that means having a class perspective, right? And understanding that the bourgeoisie can be made up of people of many different stripes and sexualities and genders. It just so happens that capitalism paired with white supremacy and patriarchy and homophobia makes a lot of the bourgeoisie like, you know, white straight men. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think I have seen this current of politics that I don't think is completely off, but it's sort of the stream of politics that talks about sort of East Asian privilege over Southeast Asian privilege, and like East Asian privilege over South Asian privilege. And I think there's like real things to that, but I think it's like there's a class basis for it, right? And this relative privilege we're talking about is usually of, I don't know, the East Asian ruling class over the Southeast Asian working class. And I think like a Marxist perspective helps cut through that, because the principle is international proletarian solidarity, right? This proletarian internationalism is, yes, there's all these different international dynamics. I mean, Japanese imperialism, right? Like, but that was not because of the Japanese people. That was because of the Japanese ruling class occupying Korea, occupying various nations in Southeast Asia. And it's sort of like, if we're focusing so much on that, we're really losing this class perspective and losing this solidarity with people of these nations. And I don't know, I that stream of politics really does come up in the U.S. Asian diaspora, and I don't know what to call it except radical liberalism. And I like, I think it's like, that's why we have to combat this sort of set of politics, because it completely undermines international solidarity and proletarian solidarity. So that's my sort of answer on it.
And yeah, and I think, I mean, just, you know, like coming into contact with working people's organizations in other countries in Asia, I feel like they're so willing to give their solidarity to other working class people in other countries, and they don't even like have any animosity towards white working class people who are Americans and who you can very easily say they're the cause of like what I'm experiencing in my country. And I think in that way Marxism is important. It's very uniting in that way.
Any other questions? No one in the live stream said anything still. It's your hardest questions. Nobody wants to ask
Or
about China.
easy questions.
Sean?
So in the beginning, you mentioned how there's not really a very large number of Asian kind of people in office in politics, whether it be local, federal, whatever. But one of the things is that kind of the structure of American politics very much encourages people that are centrist and culturally assimilated. So how do you, I guess this would be more of a personal question, but to what extent do you show support for these kinds of candidates, even if they are very, like I said, generally centrist, but representative of Asian America?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so okay.
Go in, Andrew.
I mean, I think we sort of the Marxist perspective on bourgeois democracy, right, is that it is a realm of politics that working people do pay attention to, right, and that sort of we have to engage in some way, and really Workers' World Party ran candidates in the last presidential election. It wasn't because we thought we were going to win, but it was a way to get working people to pay attention to a socialist perspective and sort of get our message and program out there. And I think it has its sort of it politically intervenes in as much as it can, right? So it's not like we're completely dismissive of sort of parliamentary politics, but we do know that it's liberal bourgeois democracy, right? It is democracy for the ruling class, and sort of the two different parties are just the left and right wing of the ruling class, and there's actually very, very little difference between them. So when we have an Asian American candidate, I mean, we have Krish, who's running for governor here in Maryland. I don't give a shit about Krish. I think if I got a gun to my head and they said you better vote, and they marched me to the voting booth. I don't even know if I'd vote for Krish even then. I think she was like a staffer in the Obama administration for Michelle. I mean, like a staffer for an imperialist administration. I don't know if I do it. I think they'd have to shoot me. I think. I mean, I think and this is different from a position I held maybe 2 years ago, where I wasn't shitting myself that voting was this extra important thing. I'm sorry, I keep swearing. I'm sorry. I wasn't kidding myself about that, but for me it was like, okay, but the working class needs to flex every political muscle it has. I think I still hold that position to an extent, but I don't fault people for not voting. I don't fault people for voting. But I also think there's this dimension of, if the ruling class starts to notice that the working class is not voting, then they'll think that they can get away with more. I don't know if that's the most material analysis, but it's still in the back of my mind. So I mean, maybe there is some benefit to having an Asian American in political office, is like they have some sort of sensitivity to the questions facing the Asian diaspora, but they're not incentivized to hold true to it. They're not incentivized to actually act upon it. They're incentivized to their donors and their funders. So that's my thing.
I mean, I will just say I think that elections, especially when, like, you know, Black, Latinx, Asian, Muslim, etc. candidates run is actually a really good opportunity to strengthen our ability to express solidarity with the working class more broadly, because you can always guarantee that when a candidate of color runs for any public office, there will be racism, there will be slander, there will be campaigns ran to smear these candidates, and so it's sort of, you know, I think holding that, right? Holding that bourgeois democracy is bourgeois democracy. It's about, you know, picking the puppets for capitalist exploitation. And I think as revolutionaries, we need to be prepared for when, you know, if an Asian American candidate is running, right, that when some racist white nationalist says something terrible and racist and orientalist, right, that we are able to intervene in that. And I think that that is a demonstration. I think that's like a real live demonstration to our class about what is actually at stake, right? That what is at stake is actually not about any sort of notion of like real democracy for working people. It is about this, you know, the theatrics of maintaining power, and that, you know, under capitalism, you know, the puppeteers of capitalism will do whatever it takes in order to maintain that system of exploitation and domination. And so, I, you know, personally, I can't vote, don't want to vote, will probably never vote, ever, and also know plenty of people like in North Carolina, right, like queer people of color have like run for office, and when that happens, yeah, the hat that I have on is like, okay, if someone comes after you and says racist or homophobic things, I will be there to defend you, but there is no way in hell that I'm going to participate in believing or making other people believe that your campaign will solve the issues that are deeply affecting us. Yeah.
Nothing.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Questions, comments? Lee? Go ahead, Lee.
The ruling class is very shrewd, conniving, and dividing. They seek to turn the slightest difficulties between people of color into the biggest things that can keep us from practicing solidarity and achieving goals for ourselves under socialism. They don't want our class to know truly what socialism is. They say that socialism is supporting your own businesses, and socialism is looking out for your race and that kind of stuff. No. To me, socialism is international solidarity. And we have a lot of how can I frame it? We have a lot of things to accomplish by uniting with Asian Americans, because for so long the bourgeois media in this city has characterized a so-called gulf between African Americans and Asian Americans. I can remember the words of Malcolm X back in the day who said that a lot of these Asian American capitalists are the Uncle Toms of their people. And to me, there was some kind of truth to that, because when I talked with someone back in my earlier days, before I really became class consciousness, about communism and how much I had hopes and everything for it to flourish, there was kind of well, communism killed my mother and my father and all kind of nonsense. But being with WWP and my comrades here in the party, it's helped me a lot to learn and experience how truly wonderful solidarity can be. And it gives me a lot of hope that our people, our class, can get it together. Because without solidarity, there can never ever be a revolution in this country. Mm-hmm. But I have hope and faith in my comrades that Workers' World Party will lead the charge with the women and the most oppressed in the forefront, guiding us to victory against the demonic capitalists. If I can frame it that way, not to be religious, but the capitalists don't have any feelings about anybody or anything. All they care about is just money, profits, and themselves. And to me, it'd be the greatest day of my life when we have revolution in this country and overthrow this horrible, bestial system of capitalism.
Thank you, Lee. Any responses? I mean,
Agreed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm glad you brought up sort of anti-Asian sentiment coming from other oppressed nationalities, because I think it's a real thing, and I can't sit here and blame people for not having that solidarity. I mean, that idea comes from white supremacy, and sort of and we can't pretend that sort of people in the Asian diaspora have sort of racist sentiments about other oppressed nationalities. I mean, part of assimilation to U.S. culture is assimilation to white supremacy and sort of bearing that inside you. And if you sort of aren't exposed to revolutionary ideas, if you aren't exposed to sort of anti-racist ideas, then you never get a chance to address it. You never get a chance to unlearn it. And unfortunately, that happens to people that are, of higher class status most of the time. People that don't face racism, or who do and don't really recognize it. So, I mean, I think that's a serious challenge, and I think it's a serious challenge we have to address within the Asian diaspora, and that's a responsibility as revolutionaries. And there's no simple way to go about it, but it's just something that we have to orient ourselves towards, and revolutionizing more Asian diaspora people. It's kind of...
Everything has a class character, right? I'm thinking about the model minority myth, for example, that it really is terrible to be assumed that you come from wealth or whatever, or have access to those things, but sort of what's at the core of that, right, is there's the class nature of that. And so having understanding and having a mature understanding of history and how those things develop is really crucial too, because I'm thinking too about just thinking about the class differences within an Asian community, right? That a lot of the internalized racism that is expressed in Asian communities almost always comes back to a class nature, right? That rich Asian folks have these pretty shitty sentiments about poor people who like can't get it together.
It's something we don't talk about, so thank you for having me.